in At the Feet of the Master, which says, once you have a glimpse into the plan, then you are a different person. I'm not quoting the exact words. You can never forget it. Joy mentioned something of this yesterday in her lecture. Even if you climb to the top of a minor peak and have a larger vision of life, it leaves its imprint on the consciousness. The very quality of consciousness changes. And therefore, it is important to have a glimpse, not a mental concept, but some kind of an inner response or awareness to what the plan is. And during these days, perhaps we can try to come to such an insight, maybe more than one insight, because the plan is so vast. If we think of it in periods of time, it's incalculable. We don't know where it begins and where it ends. It is all around us. Let us not forget that. The plan is not in some region of the higher mind, or even in still subtler planes of existence. It may be there, but it is being worked out everywhere around us in inscrutable ways. And it's, I think, important for us to be aware of it, because the implications are enormous if we realize that that plan, should I say that mind which is working out that plan? The word mind is something we think of in connection with our own mind. And so perhaps when we use that same word mind, we are distorting it, because that mind which can produce such a plan must be something which we cannot imagine. Its power, its intelligence, its love, because that love is also at work. A plan suggests something that the intellect has created. But when an architect creates a plan, produces a plan, if he is a great architect, it is not just a design which the intellect has conceived or his intelligence has created. It may be very wonderful, but it's wonderful because that plan is going to bring out, manifest something beautiful, whose proportions, symmetries, ornamentations, details are all integral to it, and which are breathtaking in their loveliness. And the plan also is obviously, if it is beautiful, it is harmonious. Everything blends with everything else. So it is said that the human mind cannot fully ever know that plan. And that's one of the wonderful things, because when we contemplate something which is entirely beyond our grasp, we realize deep in our heart, with a sense of great humility, of the nothingness of our concepts, that there is something entirely beyond our imaginings, our conceptualizations, and so on. The mind expands. It breaks its barriers. That is why perhaps HPB, in her diagram of meditation, advised contemplation of that which is beyond time and beyond space. This mind cannot take in something which is beyond time. But as you contemplate it, it is no more this mind. It crashes through the frontiers. And when Arjuna, once more we come to the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Sri Krishna, who is allegorically the source of everything. He is the unmanifest as well as the manifest. The divinity about which nothing can be said. When Arjuna says to Krishna, show me your divine form. I want to know everything about you. He was eager to see it. And Krishna replied, there is no end to me, so you cannot see. There is no end to the glories that can be revealed to show my nature. You may think that you have known certain things, but new things will always come out of that eternal source. That which is the true center of all creation, creativity. And so the book says, he revealed something of himself. And it was so dazzling. After a time, Arjuna said, please return to your normal form. I cannot bear this anymore. And that perhaps gives us some glimpse of the nature of the plan. A plan which is so extraordinary in depth, in beauty, in vastness, in its intricacy and complexity, and yet its simplicity, that we can have no idea at all if we are using this mind. can we during these few days, by contemplating the plan together, perhaps offering to each other some perceptions, if we are seriously looking at it, go a little further, have a slightly clearer vision of that plan. Not in terms of mental concepts, but through clarity of our inner eye. Can we try to do that? If we do, then maybe there will be a little change in our consciousness. We will go out of here not the same persons. You can remove your labels after that. And hopefully we can do something of that kind. Here I would like just to read to you a quotation which Annie Besant has given from the Greek text, Orpheus. All things originate from an immense principle, to which through the imbecility and poverty of human conception we give a name. Though it is perfectly ineffable, and in the reverential language of the Egyptians is a thrice unknown darkness, in contemplation of which all knowledge is refunded into ignorance. I hope you will pardon me if I read it again. All things originate from an immense principle, in which through the imbecility and poverty of human conception we give a name, though it is perfectly ineffable. And in the reverential language of the Egyptians is a thrice unknown darkness, in contemplation of which all knowledge is refunded into ignorance. Let us try to absorb silently this truth of the origin in a source about which not a word can be said. No concept can be projected. A darkness from the point of view of our mental perceptions. The unknown, the unknowable. what happens when we open ourselves to such a sublime, immense principle as being existent. There is nothing more to say. As the Bhagavad Gita says, some merely stand in awe, just pondering over this. Some listen with amazement to the voice which does not speak. Others perceive with wonder. That is all that can happen to us if we contemplate that. That ineffable principle which draws out of us only great reverence and awe. Sri Krishna says in the Gita that the unmanifest exists at two levels. There is the manifestation of the universes, and let us remember that the plan is not just the plan which exists for this solar system. There are vast universes, many systems, and that great plan embraces everything. We can hardly imagine all that. But all those universes come into being and dissolve themselves in that origin of which we heard. And that dissolution into immateriality is the return to the unmanifest. It is the pralaya which follows every period of revelation. But there is the unmanifest, which is the very ground of all that. A greater unmanifest, if we may put it that way, which is what is mentioned in this text from which we heard a few words. Something which is the origin, but is always the unknowable origin of all things. But from the unmanifest comes the manifested universes. The plan, the divine plan, which is so much part of our theosophical knowledge, so far as it goes, is not a matter about which only HPB has spoken. There is ancient literature which mentions the birth of myriads of universes and their disappearance into the absolute. But HPB was the first one who gave some idea of the progression of this manifested system. Many different kinds of words have been used for explaining this coming forth of beings from the one being or beingness, which all give us some clue of what it is about. Some say that the plan is evolution. And when we use the word evolution, it gives us some idea, some glimpse of a movement, like a great river flowing on and bringing everything to an ultimate consummation. But there are others, among them highly enlightened people like Shankaracharya, whom HPB mentions in her books, who never say a word about evolution. And it may be worthwhile for us to examine why they didn't do so. We mustn't simply conclude that this one is right and that one is wrong. It only indicates to us that there is a different way of looking at it. So we may examine that. There are others who say that, who don't speak about emanation as the Sufis did, or of evolution as Theosophists do, or who refrain from using any of these words as the Advaitins do. But they speak about everything being a self-revelation. The knowing of its own nature by that ultimate reality. They say that reality itself is a self-reflective power. It must always reveal something of its own nature to itself. In other words, there is a play which is a wonderful display. We can think of a small thing like a kaleidoscope. It's constantly revealing different designs, patterns, facets of itself. It's a very petty little thing, but still it may tell us something about the plan, which reveals the truth of that reality constantly by manifestation, by creation and dissolution. So self-knowledge and self-illumination is said to be inherent in reality. And sometimes it is called Leela, which means sport or play. And it is said that there are three forces at work primarily in this plan. The force of inertia or tamas, the force of which is movement or rajas, and the harmony and stability, which is sattva. And as these forces combine, various things come to the surface as do bubbles on the ocean's face, and they return to the great waters. And it is also said that there are 3 facets to this whole play, this revelation. And those 3 facets are God, man, and the universe. They're all part of one, but they are different appearances, different faces that it has. There are some wonderful pieces of sculpture showing the 3 faces of the one reality. So we may ponder the plan from various angles, and before we finish this morning, let us think deeply over this plan, and then it is open to anyone present here to offer any perceptions, any insights which may come through pondering this subject.
The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
Why is it that in spite of wonderful books, inspiring talks, perhaps assiduous study, we remain petty? The small self is petty. It is because no amount of intellectual understanding brings us into touch with what is real. And to come into touch with that, reflection, contemplation is the way. Our tradition in India used a word, that word is upasana. Upasana is contemplation or meditation which is sustained. But it's not meditation on just anything. It is giving complete attention to that timeless, boundless, immutable being, reality, which we pondered yesterday morning. And it is said that this kind of contemplation is like a stream of oil. If you pour oil from a container, it falls in an unbroken stream. And this contemplation must be like that. It may be just for a short time, now and again, or it may be more sustained, but even a little bit of that takes us much farther into the nature of reality, of being, than a great deal of intellectual effort. But for this to happen, and this is said, upasana is also translated as worship. And that contemplation, which is also worship, asks for certain qualifications. Not to be drawn away by anything at the sensory level. There may be many things which affect the senses. During that contemplation, you may hear the hum of the air conditioner or whatever it is which makes the hum. But there is the awareness that there is nothing but this one vibrant, extraordinary existence, being, reality. There is nothing outside it, as HPB pointed out, because it is the only thing which is. What seems to us as objects of distraction are all that, and that is the clue. Whether it is suffering or pain, joy or elation, whether we are near people who seem good or bad, it is all that. So this contemplation means being aware for whatever time or moments are possible that there is nothing but that. There are no friends and no non-friends. In her diagram of meditation, HPB says, this is one of the things which happens when you contemplate that which is not limited by space or time. That there is no foe or friend. Everything for the time being is only that great reality. Purer than the snow, it has been said. More radiant than the sun. Inconceivable in its holiness. So there must be in that contemplation nothing in the world of sense that distracts. And therefore, there is that recognition of the profound value of everything, which is a true sense of equanimity It is equal mindedness, where everything is seen to be part of a wonderful unity. And thirdly, this means a profound feeling for the welfare of everything that exists, because it's all part of that oneness. If even for a short time there is an experience of that, then this is inevitable, that there is an experience that the good of everything is our good. So this concern, profound concern for the welfare of all that is, whether it is the earth or vegetation or animal life, angelic beings, human beings, we may say that altruism, which is the essence of theosophy, it comes natural. So it is said that upasana is contemplative adoration, in which there is no distraction of the senses, where all are seen in the same light as being fragments of the divine or intrinsic parts of the divine unity, and where there is nothing but love or something like love in consciousness. So instead of trying to clutch at reality through intellectual effort, if there is sustained contemplation from time to time of that one reality, as we said, immutable, limitless, indestructible, timeless being, then there is a change in consciousness where that which we may call wisdom sight is natural. Let us think of this fact, that we go on studying, thinking, talking, discussing, and nothing happens. Nothing really. We are the same with our tears or with our laughter and all the agitations and upsets and so has hurt me and what not. We talk about the eternal, but we have no glimpse of it at all. And this is the greater knowledge. So let us contemplate to start with. Again, to maintain a certain continuity perhaps between one morning and another, the deathless and undying, ineffable, unchangeable, eternal being without distraction. Let us spend 2 or 3 minutes on that and then proceed. It is the nature of the eternal periodically to appear in time. There is a constant breathing out and breathing in, to use the well-known words. It is also compared to the light of a great star, which appears to not twinkle, but to become brighter and then to become dimmer, which is the same as saying it breathes out and breathes in. One of the Upanishads says that as the great banyan tree, perhaps you have seen pictures of the banyan tree on video, if you haven't seen it actually. In principle, a banyan tree is immortal, for it puts forth trunks and lets down roots elsewhere. One trunk may die, but the tree goes on forever. But as the great banyan tree is in every seed, and the banyan seed is not bigger than a mustard seed, the entire universe, with all the seemingly inert and active creatures, is in the heart of the Supreme. All this universe is that Supreme Being. It is its own breath which will be withdrawn back into it. But there are two things perhaps we should contemplate. One is that the breathing out is a process of becoming. It has been called becoming. But at the same time, it is pure being. This is the great paradox. HPB mentions it in The Secret Doctrine, that the ultimate reality never ceases to be what it is. We are in it. We are of it. We are surrounded by it. And its essential nature, the depth of its nature, is enveloping us. We are unconscious of it. The very well-known Indian mystic Kabir said, fishes in the ocean, if say, where is water? We are the fishes. Where is God? How can I become realized, enlightened? That is all the time in us and outside us. We are it. We are not different from it. Now we can understand why some highly evolved persons never spoke about evolution. Because from that, if we look at it in that way, there is and there can never be evolution. It always is its own true. To say its own true self is nonsense. It is always what it is. But it appears as if it is diverse. When it breathes out, the one appears to be many. Out of its own spontaneous movement, it brings out manyness. The many are not other than the one. If the many were not there, it would be impossible to know the one in its myriad aspects. If you see a glorious rosy light in the sky, you become much more intensely, blissfully aware of the nature of light than when there is just what we call light, which is there all the time. And that is true of not only of the rosy light, but of every other shade and nuance of all the different colors. So the diversity is a form of blessing. It offers, through the reduction of what actually is, a clearer glimpse of what it is. Unless Maya veils our eyes, and then we think there is nothing other than that rosy light. But diversity is a way through which it reveals itself. Every diverse being is a revelation, but it is also a veil. Every diverse object conceals the reality. This is a mystery. It is like taking a magnifying glass to look at some particular thing. Then you see that thing magnified, and you see it in all its complexity, beauty, etc. But when you do that, you shut out everything else, because the magnifying glass shows you only a little bit of what is. So there is this play, the one becoming the many, and the many assimilating themselves again into the unity. It's a process of becoming the many and of synthesizing. Synthesizing is not right, because there's nobody to synthesize, but all of it assuming the unity once again. Perhaps if we look at it like that, it gives some meaning to what appears like a chaotic process. By concealing a part of its nature, it reveals more sharply some aspect of itself. So the concealment is a form of blessing. And then perhaps if we think of it further, we may realize that there are aspects to this veiling of the reality which are for the present mysteries to us. For example, that which is beyond time presents itself in terms of time. What does that linear movement, which is time, show to us of that which is beyond time? We are not going to discuss it just now, but I am mentioning it as an example of where our pondering may take us. But the main point is that which is concealed is at the same time revelatory. And everything that is in manifestation is concealed concealing the truth. From that oneness arise, the Mundaka Upanishad says, life. Life in the sense we know it is not that reality. From that arise life, mind, all the senses, the elements, ether, air, fire, water, earth. It is the support of all. David Bohm, in his well-known book, says, order and unity are part of an implicate order which constitutes a fundamental aspect of reality. And in the manifested process, a vast panorama is presented of that order. If we read the theosophical literature about manifestation, we see or get a glimpse of the fact that it is a building process. First, the material, substance, arrives on the scene, so to speak. It takes form. From simple forms, it builds up complex forms. Then it seems to come alive. It has always been alive, but it seems to come alive. And these living things grow in complexity all the time, one by one. The senses begin to function. And as the senses function, and the mind is connected with the senses, it's not only the Raja of the senses, but it's a kind of sense itself. Then they all begin to make consciousness manifest itself in such ways that we begin to understand what consciousness is little by little. In the ancient wisdom, Annie Besant says, examining the materials belonging to this physical plane, we are struck by their immense variety. You can read E.O. Wilson or anybody, there are many books like this on the diversity of life, how that diversity takes place. The innumerable differences of constitution in the objects around us, that itself is miraculous. Minerals, vegetables, animals, all differing in their constituents. Matter hard and soft, transparent and opaque, brittle and ductile, bitter and sweet, pleasant and nauseous, colored and colorless. You can add to this list, but all this is part of the diversity. But if that diversity were not there, we would not be able to see the creative quality of life. The unique ways in which it takes countless paths. Life flows into you as an individual, into the millions of billions of other people and other forms of life, but it does not flow in the same way. Without diversity, there would be no revelation of individuality and uniqueness. each one of us have unique ways of sensing the rest of life through our sensory perceptions, through our emotions of sympathy or empathy, through our mental operations, and that which is beyond mind, our simple, pure awareness. All this proceeds in unique ways. So none of us can see exactly as another one sees or feels. But all of us are part of that development, that flowering of consciousness. Unfortunately, we don't sense the beauty of it all.